All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode, another class. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I'm joined by Noah Gittell, who is author of a book called Baseball, the Movie. Now, a lot of people know me being a lifelong fan of baseball and growing up watching a lot of these movies that are written about in this book. It was really special to be able to listen to this book. I listened on Audible. It's great to be able to listen to it. Noah's been really great to give his time to join us. So Noah, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a delight to speak with somebody who loves baseball movies as much as I do.
And it's so evident the way that you write in this book. So thank you very much that you are a true fan of baseball, entertainment, and the movie that the baseball movie that we all enjoy. So as a way of kind of getting us into the conversation, I always like to ask everyone sort of their origin story or introduction, if you will. Tell us how you got involved with baseball, what it's meant to you, and ultimately how it led you to the fact that you've written a book about baseball movies in our culture.
So I grew up in the New York area in the 1980s. And the first year that I followed baseball was 1986. And I don't know that there is a team that would be more fun to watch as a 6-year-old kid than the 86 Mets. They had all these incredible personalities on that team. Keith Hernandez, Gary Carter, Doc Gooden. I mean, they had a guy named Strawberry. I mean, how much fun is that when you're 6 years old? A big, goofy, incredible, graceful player. Uh, so that team was amazing, and they were a lot of fun to watch. And I fell in love with baseball that year, and almost had my heart broken. But then, a little miracle happened when that ball went between Buckner's legs, and I thought, wow, baseball's amazing. This is going to happen every year. And it didn't. In fact, some days I think that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But most days I'm grateful that there was a team like that to hook me and make me fall in love with the game. And being a Mets fan definitely builds character. I think baseball in general, being a fan of the game, builds a lot of character. And I look forward to the baseball season like we all do. And I love the game. It's one of the great passions of my life. I'm really grateful to be a baseball fan. Made me a better person too, I think, in a lot of ways. Um, but as a writer, I began writing late. I mean, I wrote, in school a little and stuff, and I did study creative writing in college, but I don't think I was very good at fiction writing. I didn't really think of myself as a journalist or an author, but I had a day job my whole adult life, and there was a period in my early 30s when I didn't have much to do at my day job for various reasons. My boss was gone a lot. And I started writing about film, which is the other passion of my life. And I started a blog, and it kind of took off from there. And I started submitting pieces, and I had got this little freelance career going and made a little bit of a name for myself. And then somewhere along the line, a few years ago, I got a piece published in the New York Times that was about film and baseball. It was about John DeMarsico, who is the director of the Mets telecast, who is a huge cinephile and incorporates a lot of cinematic techniques into the broadcast, homages to certain films, like just through the shots alone. And I thought that was a really cool thing. So I wrote a piece of the Times about that. And I wrote a few more pieces about the Mets for the Times. I actually got to go into the clubhouse and report on a story. And I went and interviewed Daniel Murphy when he was trying to make his comeback. And that was great. And so I had a little foothold in baseball and film writing. And it just felt like it was time in my career to write a book. And as I was trying to think of ideas, this was the one I kept coming back to because the book hadn't been written. It was a book I wanted to read that didn't exist yet. It was a book I was qualified to write. I could pitch to publishers that I was the right person to write this particular book. And mostly I chose a topic that I knew I wouldn't get sick of. You know, writing a book is a long process from the proposal to the press tour, we're talking 3 years minimum. And you have to choose a topic that you really, really like. And I'm happy to report that over 3 years into this process now, sitting down here for another 45-minute, hour-long conversation, of which I've had many over the last few months, I'm still not tired of talking about it. I still get excited thinking about these movies, and I love meeting other people who care about them as much as I do. And that's been really one of the great reasons of this whole process.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you for that. And while you were talking, I w was looking at the list that I sent you, and I remember I wanted to ask about certain movies. And so I started jotting some down, and I'm like, well, I've got to talk about this. I've got to talk about that. And soon, the list just it overflows. And I actually a few weeks ago spoke to somebody for a podcast they do about, and we talked about our favorite movies, our favorite sports movies, sorry. And we started with this list of 50 something and tried to whittle it down. And then once we got it to 10, then we kind of rank ordered each one of ours. And I think I want to say 6 or 7 of the 10 were baseball movies. And that has to do with the fact that myself and the person I was talking to, we're both baseball fans. But it's just it's so important and impactful in our society. What, in your view, what makes a baseball movie so important to our entertainment and to our consumption, and in many ways different from other sports movies that baseball movies can do that maybe we don't get from
Yeah.
other ones?
Couple things jump to mind. I do think baseball is the most cinematic sport. It's the sport that lends itself to cinema the most. And there's a few different reasons for that. I think one is it's easier to film in some ways than other sports. I mean, trying to film the choreography of an NFL play or even an NBA play, like that's hard, you know? Baseball, though, you can have different setups, one camera on the pitcher, one on the batter, one on the fielders, and it's easier to put together, I think, in a lot of ways. But I also think the individual nature of baseball. You know, it's a team sport, but it's also a sport of individual confrontation. I think that lends itself to cinema as well. When I think about a pitcher staring in at his catcher or staring in at the batter staring back at the pitcher, it reminds me of a Western. You know, it reminds me of Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef, like a duel in a Sergio Leone movie or something. And I think there's something in that that touches on the fundamentals of cinema, American cinema in particular, which is very individualistic. And I also think just the pace of the game lends itself to cinema. There's time in a baseball game and a baseball movie to hear a character's inner monologue. Or in the case of Nuke Lelouch, his external monologue. Because
Mhm.
I think one of the great jokes of that movie is he's too dumb to have an inner monologue. Um, and you know, other sports don't have that. They don't have time to set the scene with a great play-by-play announcer like Vin Scully does in For Love of the Game or Bob Uecker does in Major League. It just is a lot easier to set the scene, understand the characters, and watch it all play out in a baseball movie than it is in films about other sports. And I do think one of the reasons the baseball movie is so important to our culture and to our lives, I think some of that has to do with the fact that it is or was the national pastime. And there's this long history linking baseball and America. That's kind of what my book is about in a lot of ways. In addition to being a celebration of baseball movies, it's also an examination of how those movies over the years have reflected changes in American culture, the American character. And I don't think other sports movies do that in the same way. Baseball is uniquely qualified to speak to American characteristics. And one of the great pleasures of writing this book was tracking how the baseball movie changed over the years and how it reflected those broader changes.
Yeah, and I remember actually when I graduated high school, I had moved to I went to school at the University of Texas. So I had moved to Austin and I lived with my sister the summer before I started, and she was taking a class called Baseball and Society.
Mhm.
And I had no idea that such a class would exist. But that class was about what you're talking about, how what was happening in baseball at the time, how that tracked with what was happening in our broader society. And that was really the first time for me that I kind of realized, hey, here are some things why this is so important. Because what was going on with the White Sox scandal, what was going on at that time was very, very important to, or it made baseball very, very important. It made a very important diversion for people. Um, and it's so interesting to follow what the sport has given us throughout our history. And I really like what you said about, when you look at a pitcher and a catcher and that relationship, it reminds you of a Western. It also reminds me of, and this is obviously outside of the United States, but in Japanese culture, the focus on kind of the samurai warriors. It's very one-on-one between that pitcher and catcher. And a lot of that is told through a movie like Mr. Baseball, where you kind of are able to learn things about a different culture, and you're able to learn. A really cool thing is able to learn about a different culture through something that you already have a connection with, a strong connection with, which is really, really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
and samurais and cowboys are definitely cut from the same
yeah,
cloth, you know?
yeah.
I mean, th those movies have been remade like in both directions. And just a note about Mr. Baseball. People bring up Mr. Baseball to me all the time. People really love that movie, and they're like, "Why didn't you talk more about Mr. Baseball in the book?" And I will say right from the get-go, I just don't think it's a very good movie. But you're if you like it, you're in the majority because that's probably the number one movie people bring up to me.
Really,
Yeah,
really.
yeah. I think people watched it as kids and really liked it when they were growing up, and it did do something different than other baseball movies had done. So I think it stuck out, and it was, I suppose, prophetic in a way,
Yeah,
predicting the influx of American players to Japan.
yeah. And so this book, you said it goes through, it tracks movies through time and what's going on out in our broader society. Another really, really cool thing that I really enjoyed about it is you get into talking about, well, the actor who was playing this part was not didn't have a lot of athletic ability. So the screenshots that you see, or the shots that you see, close-up swings, or you're seeing their face when they're batting or they're throwing, that's actually because, they're trying to sort of mask this. They're trying to mask the physical uh kind of athletic abilities of
Yeah,
the player, which
the visual grammar of baseball films was invented basically to mask the fact that these guys couldn't really play. I
Mhm.
mean, if they could play as well as professional baseball players, they would just shoot it like a professional baseball game. They'd have a camera out in center field, they do all that stuff. But I start the book with The Pride of the Yankees because to me that's the first important baseball film. And Lou Gehrig and Gary Cooper, they might have shared a disposition, but they sure didn't share any athletic ability. Garrett
Mhm.
Cooper was not a baseball player, not familiar with the game at all. He batted from the wrong side. He grew up partially in England, so like baseball sort of just passed him by. Although he was an athlete in other ways. He was good on a horse, supposedly. But they had to train him to play the role. They hired a ex major leaguer to teach him how to play, and it was a big news story leading up to the release of the film. Like, will he be able to approximate Lou Gehrig on a baseball field? And in the end, I think the answer was yes, but they had to come up with a lot of tricks. to do
Hmm.
that. They had him run to third base instead of first base because he couldn't learn to bat from the correct side. So they had to reverse everything. They literally reversed the film. And they invented this grammar of, watching him swing the bat, not seeing him hit the ball, but hearing the sound of the ball being struck,
Hmm.
and then cutting to the ball being, flung to the outfield, which we've seen in so many baseball films ever since. It's a little bit of movie magic, but that's what they have to do most of the time because, movie stars they have great physiques, but that's not the same thing as being a great athlete. And there are very few who have really like been up to snuff. It did change a bit in the 80s, I think. Robert Redford had a good swing and Kevin Costner definitely set a new bar in Bull Durham. But even so, like for many years after that, there have always been nitpicks and quibbles with this sort of thing. First of all, because baseball people love to nitpick and quibble, as I have learned since my book came out. Uh, but also, I just think, with watching films and watching baseball on huge TVs in high definition, like our need for verisimilitude is just much greater than it
Hmm.
was back in the 40s and 50s when, we didn't even barely have close-ups watching baseball on TV. So the sport has changed, the way we watch the sport has changed, and the movies have had to change.
Yeah. And to that point, something that I've experienced on a personal level is I for the last few years I've coached my two sons' youth baseball teams, and it's always really, really interesting to me to talk to kids about what they think or how they think they should play baseball. And in particular, it's always the swing. You know, a kid will tell me, well, this is the way the major leaguers swing. And it's always, it looks like somebody is starting with the bat up, they swing down and they swing back up so they can get the home run hit.
Launch
And
angle.
yeah, yeah, like they're looking at their launch angle and I'm telling these kids, here's the difference. These players, they've been doing this their whole lives. They have probably taken a million swings. And here's a very important difference. They're so good. Their swing is so fast that really what we see with our eyes is kind of the end part of the swing, the second part of the swing, where they've already gone through the techniques. And yeah, so what you're seeing is their bat is ending up in the air, but they're not automatically just, as soon as the pitch is thrown, dropping their bat and doing like a big W with their or a big U with their swing. Like they're going through all of this. And so that's really interesting that you said, watching with watching in high definition and the way that we can watch it now, the quality of the telecast now does really make a difference. I want to ask a question about the research for this because I mean, there's a ton of research, and as I said, I listen to the Audible version, so I love listening to audiobooks. One kind of downside of that is um, I don't get to see all the sourcing and get to look at back of books and see all of the sourcing. Where, first of all, how long did this take you to research before you were able to start writing? And where were you able to get this information? Is a lot of this just original source? You had to go back. Where
It's
were you able to get all of that?
it's a mix, I looked everywhere I could. The way I wrote the book, I actually went chapter by chapter. So I researched a chapter and I wrote a chapter. Then I researched the next chapter and I wrote the next chapter. I did do some preliminary basic research before I sold the book, in putting together the proposal, I had to do some research, but most of it was done on the fly. Once I sold the book, I only had a year to deliver the final product. And maybe a year sounds like a long time, but when you think about like delivering the final product means you've gone through several drafts already as well. So, I was writing two chapters a month basically. So that's researching and writing, and it was very hard work. And my research came from everywhere. There was online research, newspapers.com is every author's friend, every nonfiction author's friend. I read other books that had been written. I mean, there was a great book about the Pride of the Yankees that I leaned on pretty heavily for my chapter about Pride of the Yankees. Ron Shelton wrote a book about Bull Durham. I actually didn't read that one because I didn't want to be too influenced by it. But if I were doing it now, maybe I would. And then I went several times to in New York to the Lincoln Center, the New York Public Library Performing Arts Library, which they have a great thing where if you send them the list of topics that you're interested in, and they have to be pretty specific, it can't just be baseball or something. You set an appointment and you show up, and they will have pulled clips from all of their sources, newspapers, other periodicals. So I did that for every baseball movie that I was writing about. And I went in there and I saw, this is important, what was said about these films at the time. And that's really important because, I do some work in the book where I'm looking at movies, older movies through contemporary eyes. I do
Mhm.
that in the book. But it's also, in order to do that properly, you have to see how they were received at the time. And there were a lot of surprises, to be honest with you. For example, uh, in writing about the Jackie Robinson movies, both the Jackie Robinson story in 1950 and 42, one of my critiques of those films is that they paint Jackie as basically a saint, that as somebody who was preternaturally restrained, who wasn't tempted with anger or rage at the
Mhm.
abuse that he was inflicted upon. And I think that, there's a positive and a negative to that. The positive is that in 1950, like that movie was an advertisement for integration. And many teams were not integrated yet by 1950. So they were trying to show, look at this guy, look how great he is, and he's not a threat to anybody, and he's just a really nice guy who plays the game really well. And there's value. On the other hand, not everybody is in the position that he was in, where he was being paid a decent amount of money to play a game, and where not fighting back and not defending yourself from abuse is an option. And I worried that I would be criticized for applying the racial politics of today to a prior era. But I found articles written in black newspapers at the time making those very same points, saying, hey, this movie has a lot of value. It's great that Jackie Robinson is getting this kind of spotlight and they're showing, his approach, but not all of us can afford to not fight back when we're being
Mhm.
abused. And I was really floored by that. Not that it was so unexpected, but it's to me it's such an important point when looking at old culture, especially when you're talking about race or gender or sexual identity, anything like that. And the point is that whatever criticisms we have today were probably applied then as well. But the people voicing those criticisms didn't have a microphone. Like
Mhm.
those voices were not amplified because they came from marginalized communities. So that it was so important to me to include those voices from Black newspapers in the articles, the chapters about Jackie Robinson, for that very reason. And of all the research that I did, that was the research I was most excited to share.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Um, so to briefly touch on a few of the movies that like I said stood out to me, have influenced my life, that you wrote about, and I really enjoy you writing about them. We've mentioned them a few times, and I actually almost chose this as my virtual background for this visit. But the first one is Bull Durham. It's just I I I don't know how old I was when I first watched that movie. I was uh, undeniably too young to watch that movie. I didn't understand,
Yeah.
a lot of what was going on. But what I really, really liked about that is the fact that the Durham Bulls have always, or for much of their history, have been a pretty decent or a more than decent baseball team. It was just, it kind of was created this cool story because you could turn the name around to Durham Bulls to Bull Durham. But one thing I really, really liked about it is you mentioned one, Kevin Costner kind of changing things. with his athletic ability. I think his ability, both athletic and acting, uh, he kind of stands apart to me as sort of that baseball actor.
Yeah.
A good, if he's in a movie about baseball, I'm gonna watch it. I love For Love of the Game because he's in it. And yeah, you're right about that. If that's really, is it how much of a baseball movie is that? Because it really is like a romantic
Yeah.
story. But specific to Bull Durham, I was really interested when you wrote that that is one of the most accurate movies or tellings base from baseball players' perspectives. Can you explain a little bit of that to us?
Yeah, so that movie was written and directed by Ron Shelton. It was his first movie. Ron Shelton was a minor league baseball player. He was a professional baseball player. Never got to the majors. Had a couple of good seasons in the minors, and he brought so much inside information to that movie. And it's not even in just one area. Like, yes, he based certain incidents on real life. The scene where Crash gets a rain out by turning on the sprinklers at the stadium. Uh, Ron Shelton did that in Amarillo, Texas, and he joked in an interview that it was the wrong place to do it because there's nothing to do on a night off in Amarillo, Texas. Um, so there's stuff like that that he brings to it. I think the language, the vocabulary, uh, I didn't know that they called the majors the show until I saw Bull Durham, and now it's the name of the video game that is,
Yeah.
lasted for 20 years. And um, I think the inner monologue of the players is something he brought to it that was very authentic. I joked about Nuke not having an inner monologue, but Crash certainly does, and I think often about the scene where he is kind of trying to guess what the pitcher is going to throw him, preparing for it. And we'd never really seen that before in a baseball
Mhm.
film. We'd never seen a character's inner monologue. And honestly, all of the sex talk, like there is so much talk about sex in that movie. And maybe in a sports movie, maybe in Slapshot, there was a bit of that. But in a baseball movie, no, like Bang the Drum Slowly had a little bit, but not like this, where it was so frank and was the way people actually talked about sex and the amount that these guys actually talked about sex. I think that was probably pretty accurate and not something we had seen before. So it really carries all the way through the film. And the other thing that I write about in the book, he's talked about this a lot, is the approach in general that he had to filming the baseball, which was he's competing with TV, and TV has 20 cameras. He doesn't have 20 cameras. So what is he going to do to show us something different? And he came up with the idea of we're going to go places that the TV cameras can't go. We're going to go to the mound during a mound conference. We're going to go right between the catcher and the umpire when they're screaming at each other, and we're going to find out what they're actually saying to each other. We're going to go on the bus. We're going to go in the clubhouse. We're going to go in the dugout. This is going to be the focus of the film. And that is a brilliant choice. And it's a choice that could only really be made by somebody who had actually played the game because he
Mhm.
actually knew what those conversations sounded like.
And it's one thing one reason I think I always enjoyed it is I grew up playing catcher. So we would have mound visits. Now you know, we weren't talking about some of the things they were talking about, but you would go to the mound sometimes, and if somebody's struggling, you would have a different conversation with them. It wasn't always just, hey, let's strike this person out. It
Right.
was like talking about other things. And it's just such a cool representation of what it was to be a baseball player. I never played at a high level. I played into high school and some when I was college age, not for my college. Um, but it was so fun, and it still is so much fun to watch that and to hear those conversations see the camaraderie between the players because it does remind you of that happening. And it
Yeah.
reminds you of some of the discussions you have, which is really, really cool.
Well, and for me, somebody who didn't really play the game beyond Little League, he could have put anything in there, and I would have found it enchanting
Mhm.
because just getting to be there and hearing some version of what is said in those situations, to me, it's like revealing, pulling back the curtain and revealing the reality behind this game that I've loved for so long, but I've only seen the surface level of. But I think most of those scenes, when you're watching them, even if you don't know that what he's portraying is accurate, it just feels accurate. It has a ring of
Yeah.
authenticity to it that is something that's hard to define, but very hard to argue.
And one of my favorite stories you tell about that movie, and then I'll begrudgingly move on from Bull Durham, is when he when he showed that, um, correct me if I'm wrong, he showed it in Durham at first, right? Is that where the
Yeah.
movie premiered? And minor league players were in there. And the scene it's probably 5 minutes into the movie, 7 minutes into the movie, where a player gets cut, and he talked about, just that you write about the silence in that room of people just kind of that is the reality. Like, what are you going to do now? Your baseball career, your baseball life, so to speak, just may have just ended. What do you do from that? And it's such a cool perspective that he was able to offer and that you write about in the book is so, so cool.
That was a real revelation to me, honestly. I spoke with Jerry Blevins for the book. There's one little quote from him in the Rookie of the Year chapter, but we had a long conversation. For those who might not know, he was a relief pitcher in the majors for a long time. Pitched for the Braves, the Mets, the Nationals, the A's, I think. And I talked with him about that scene, actually. It didn't make it into the book, but I learned so much from this conversation. And he said, that's why they call it dying. That's why when a guy gets cut, we say he died because it's not just the end of your career. It is the end of of the way that you live.
Mhm.
He said, when you're a baseball player, when you're a professional ball player, every decision you make in your life is about being prepared to play, where you live, who you live with, what you eat, what time you get up, like all the things that we take for granted as things that we do because we enjoy them or because they're good for our health or whatever, they do to prepare to play the game and be at their best. And he said when he retired, he didn't know what he liked to eat because
Mhm.
he'd never had to make that decision before. Every decision was about being the best he could be on the field. So I think that's why that scene is so haunting because you sense that. You sense that for that player, like this isn't just like it's kind of, sort of feels like a breakup, like a romantic breakup a little bit, but it's more than that. He's raging against the dying of the light in that scene. It's really sad and really brutal.
Yeah. Um, you also write about, I mean, you write about comedies like Major League, which is always to me, it's in the top 4 or 5 movies, sports movies, because of the representation and really the talk of the fans, which was really, really cool. That
Yeah.
it and you write about that, how he brought or that movie brought in the fan perspective. You write about, the fantasy of the natural. Um, One movie that you spent a lot of time writing about that I thought was really, really interesting is A League of Their Own. And what I thought was so fascinating about that is the level of interest for people to try out for the roles in A League of Their Own. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was one of the hottest auditions, tryouts in Hollywood, maybe ever. Um, because I mean, look, people are excited about the movie because the director was coming off a hit, and there was talent involved already. Like Gina Davis was attached, like Tom Hanks was attached. But I think more than that, these were roles for women that were rare in Hollywood. It was hard to find roles where women got to have, fully formed personalities and were not defined by their relationship to a man, like which is how most roles in female roles in Hollywood are written. So there was a sense that this was going to be a big movie. And it was also during this era in which there was a lot of excitement about women in film. It was a year after Thelma and Louise,
Mhm.
which when that movie came out, also starring Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon from Bull Durham. When that movie came out, there were a lot of articles written about how we were entering this new era for women in film, and women were going to be telling their own stories, and there would be better parts for women, which didn't really come to fruition, although I think there has been a lot of progress over the years. So basically, every woman in Hollywood showed up for this audition that they held on a baseball field. Rod Dedeaux, I think his name is, the USC coach, supervised the whole thing. And they decided, that they needed to make sure these women could play before they even engaged their acting skills. And I think that's not something that men had to do
Yeah,
historically in
yeah.
films, although it was becoming more and more like that by the time The League of Their Own came out. But I think they understood that there would be intense scrutiny of the women and their athletic skills. And I think most of them did a pretty good job. When I watched that
Hmm.
movie, to me, the standout is they have an audition, they have a tryout sequence in the film
Yeah.
that probably mirrors very much like what the real tryout sequence was like. And they do show some of the principal actors in that sequence. Gina Davis throws an absolute strike down to second base from behind the plate. But I think they clearly brought in some ringers and like got some like college softball players or something, because there's really like some tremendous uh displays of athletic excellence in that sequence that really sets the standard. And I think kind of like anybody who would be watching this movie and saying like, oh, how good could these women be at baseball? I think you watch that sequence and you're like, okay, these ladies can play. They know what they're doing. Now we can just kind of relax and watch the rest of
Yeah. And you talk about like um how some movies, they obviously, to all movies, take creative liberties. Um, One that comes to mind for me is the movie The Rookie, the Disney movie The Rookie, which was based on a true story. But it was filmed around the Austin area when I was playing adult baseball in Austin.
it.
So people in our league actually were extras in that movie. I didn't go and try out to be an extra in that movie, but I was watching it the other day with the family, and it's these high school kids, and then the team that they're playing against, you could tell these men are, they're 25, 26, 30 years old. Um,
I thought you were going to say
and
they
and
were extras in like the major league sequences. No, they were extras as high school kids.
they
Interesting.
were extras in the high school. Yeah. Some of them, there were a few, I think, that were extras in like when he was playing with the Durham Bulls, which was
Mhm.
another really cool thing about that movie is like I can watch it and I know where, oh, that stadium is here.
Yeah.
That where the Durham Bulls played in that movie. Well, that's actually Dell Diamond where the Round Rock Express plays. So
Hmm.
it's so cool to me to be able to do things like that. You write about Little Big League also, which which we watched the other day because the book reminded me of it. And just kind of the different perspective that it took, and how it sort of was at the end of the baseball genre push. And so, it didn't really get the credit that it deserved.
Yeah, there were a few things working against it, I think. One is it was sort of at the end of this run. People were maybe getting a little tired of baseball movies. The second one was that it came out like a month before the strike in '94, and
Mhm.
I think there was sort of a sour mood around baseball at that time. And the third was that it got overshadowed by Rookie of the Year, which was a more successful film about a similar topic, uh, but I think less good. I mean, I think Little Big League is a superior film in a lot of ways. And the thing that makes it superior is that it takes its baseball seriously.
Yeah.
They hired as many former major leaguers as they could uh, for speaking roles, including like Kevin Elster from my '86 Mets plays the shortstop in the film. I can't remember the player's name who plays the Blackout Gatling, the relief pitcher, but he was a real MLB player. And they got a lot of current MLB players to do cameos. Carlos Baerga, Mickey Tettleton has a couple
Hmm.
lines, and of course Ken Griffey Jr. is the heavy in the final sequence. And I think that was really smart because they have this outlandish premise. A kid makes it to the majors as a manager, but they grounded it in realism. And that worked much better to me than Rookie of the Year, which just goes as kind of broad and cartoonish as it
Hmm.
can. But the other thing that Little Big League does well that I am so fascinated by, and really this is the reason I wanted to write about it, was it predicted in some ways the sabermetrics revolution
Hmm.
and the idea of players managers.
Hmm.
This kid on the player manager front, like he becomes friends with all the players. He sort of is friends with them already because his grandfather owns the team. But he's not a disciplinarian. In fact, the manager he fires is. He's like a Earl Weaver type or something. Like he screams at all the players and the umpires, and that's his shtick. But the kid fires him and installs himself as manager and basically succeeds by being friendly with the players and respecting them and trusting them. And that predicted a lot of managers in MLB. And he is a sabermetrician in his own way. There's this incredible scene in the movie where he is trying to uh, convince the general manager and the bench coach that he's good enough to be the manager of the team. And they said, well, you don't know, you won't know how to do it. This game's all about situations. And he says, give me a situation, and I'll tell you what I would do.
Hmm.
And the bench coach gives him a kind of generic situation without a lot of detail. And this kid just asks question after question after question. How many outs are there? What inning are we, home or away? Who's rested in the bullpen? Who do I have on my bench? And you can see the bench coach's face sort of like he's having a revelation as he's listening to this because he's like, I don't ask these questions. I go with the conventional wisdom. And that's what baseball managers and coaches did for 100 years.
Hmm.
So this kid understands that the best way to make a decision is by asking questions. And that hard to believe, but that was sort of a revolutionary idea in the mid
Yeah.
90s and became the basis for all the advanced analytics and sabermetrics that we all respect and believe in today.
Yeah. And another movie that really, to me, it talks about that it kind of a recap way, but it also takes some liberties with the facts that they're playing with, and you write about this, is Moneyball. And I really enjoy Moneyball. The way that even coaching youth baseball, I try to keep as in-depth statistics as you can for a youth league, just because I like doing that. I work with statistics on a regular basis for writing and research. So I enjoy keeping up with the statistics and enjoy talking to the players about, here's what you do in this situation. Here's why you don't want to swing at the first pitch every time you get up. You want that pitcher to have to throw more pitches to you. And we celebrate as a team if somebody has a 7 pitch at bat, regardless if they get on base, strike out, whatever. I'll tell the other players that's a 7 pitch at bat. You need to be talking to that player when they get back in because they just allowed you to see more pitches. And so Moneyball really gets into the story of how baseball changed to really focus on the statistics driven analysis of the game. It took some great liberties with the story. It's about the Oakland A's. It's about Billy Beane and the system that was implemented at the Oakland A's. But tell us about some of those liberties that
Yeah.
it took.
Well, first of all, like you, I respect Moneyball because it is the only film that tells the story of baseball in the 21st century, like what actually has happened in the game. It's the only one that really does
Hmm.
that. So that's an important document, and it's a very entertaining film. But in order to make it work dramatically, they had to do some things that really pissed a lot of people off. One of those things is they made Art Howe into the
Hmm.
antagonist.
Yeah.
Um, from what I understand, he was pretty supportive of Billy Beane's plan. He's also known as one of the nicest guys in the game. And as played by the great Philip Seymour Hoffman, he's the villain of the story. Well, him and the scout are basically like the two villains of the story. Somebody who resents Billy Beane's innovation. He wants to do things his way, the old way. Um, and I think it was important to do it this way because they had to dramatize the central power struggle
Hmm.
that was brought on by the analytics revolution, which is, you know, the clash between the front office and the manager. Who writes the lineup card? I mean, we still don't know who writes the lineup card
Yeah.
for a lot of teams, but it's a fascinating controversy and source of tension. So I think that was important for the dramatic tension. The thing that most players hate about Moneyball, and from what I have heard, Moneyball is probably the most hated baseball film by people who
Mm.
play this game in the majors, is that they ignored Tim Hudson,
Yeah.
Barry Zito, Mark Mulder, Miguel Tejada, Eric Chavez. You know, the five best players on the team barely get a mention in the whole movie. They had an MVP. They had maybe the most dominant three-headed monster in the rotation that we've seen in this century. Miguel Tejada won the MVP that year, and I think he has one line in the movie, his character. And the reason they did that was because Billy Beane didn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
Billy, like any GM in baseball would have picked those five guys to be on their team. So instead, they focus on Hatterberg and Justice and Chad Bradford, the guys who Billy Beane sort of handpicked, him and his team, Peter Brandt, as he's known in the film, to they found these guys off the scrap heap and they turned them into productive major leaguers. And the reason they did that is because they want to celebrate Billy Beane. They want to celebrate a guy who had no money to work with and turned the team into a playoff team. That pisses players off. It
Yeah.
pisses players off because they don't like the attention not being on them. I think more than that, it pisses them off because it's essentially a pro management movie. I talked to Trevor Hildenberger, who was responsible in part for unionizing the minor leagues. And he's ping-ponged back and forth in his career between the majors and the minors. And his point was like, this is a movie that celebrates a guy for paying players as little as possible and still
Yeah.
winning. Now, it's very clear in the movie that Billy Beane doesn't want to pay players as little as possible. It's his dead-eyed sociopathic owner who doesn't want to pay anyone. But in the end, it celebrates that way of doing business, which is find the guys you can get for the least who will do the most for you. And I can see why players take issue.
Yeah. The last thing I want to ask before we get to our rapid questions, and I would be remiss if I said you write about fantasy, you write about love stories in baseball. You know, we started watching Field of Dreams last week and having that conversation with the boys about what the meaning of baseball is. But you also write about with the introduction of the play clock and now, in my opinion, the introduction of things like streaming and how the game has really needed to be sped up. It for consumption sake, it's needed to be sped up, and I think the numbers kind of show that last year that it was a success. But what will the baseball movie look like in 5 years? Will we be telling current stories, or will we be telling stories from before play clock, before,
Yeah,
the game's shortened?
I don't think that the changes that have been made to the game are going to dramatically impact the ability to make a good baseball movie. I do make the point in the book that the pitch clock is not ideal for the baseball movie because that time in between things is really important. You
Mhm.
know, but cinema can stretch out that time. Cinema is magic with time. So if they want to create a little more time for a pitcher to have an internal monologue or something, like they can find a way to do that. I mean, I think these changes, while they certainly improved attendance, like they do fundamentally change the game in some ways. I
Mhm.
don't think it's as contemplative a sport as it was a few years ago, and maybe we're not a society for contemplation anymore. Maybe this was necessary in order to make the game survive. But I do think it's changed the sport in some ways that are a little hard to define, but nonetheless still quite impactful to me. So I do think if there are more baseball movies to come, that they will feel different.
Okay.
I think we have lost something. I'm just not entirely sure what it is, to be honest with you. But to me, I think the biggest change that will come for baseball movies, if there is another baseball movie revolution or baseball movie boom, is that I think they will be more international in the future. I
Yeah.
think MLB is trying to internationalize itself as much as possible. I think the World Baseball Classic would be a fantastic setting for a baseball film. There were so many incredible stories at the last one. And it's funny because I wrote this book about baseball as a symbol for America, but maybe this was an elegy for that. Maybe in
Yeah.
the future, baseball will be a symbol for something more global.
Yeah. And one additional thing that I think is really interesting that could influence the future is um, much like much like the Walt Disney Company did with the Mighty Ducks movies and Angels in the Outfield, where they made Angels in the Outfield a remake, and then 2 years later actually owned the California Angels, named them Anaheim Angels, and then sold them later. The influence of these media companies on what stories are told, and even in that case, those two movies directly they helped ticket sales for, or those movies helped ticket sales for those two teams as well, even though they didn't own those teams when those movies first came out. I think that's really interesting looking at the future of just kind of overall entertainment and consumer entertainment is what are the influences of these media companies, and then I mean, you get past the media companies, you talk about the tech giants,
Yeah.
Apple and Alphabet or Google. What are their influences going to be on this? It's really, really interesting to talk about. So I have a few rapid questions written down. Before we do that, is there anything that I've left out you think is important to mention?
No, I guess I would just tell people who are interested in reading the book that it's not, I like to warn people, it's not a definitive, comprehensive history of the baseball movie. Like, I don't talk about every baseball movie. I mean, I try to mention all of the big ones at least, but I really focus on the ones that tell the story of America because that was the focus of the book. I felt that was necessary. I didn't want to just write an encyclopedia of the
Yeah.
baseball movie. Anyone else could do that. This is my personal view of these films, and I do offer a lot of opinions. People may agree with or disagree with. When you read my chapter on the Sandlot, you might not be too happy with me. But I try to be fair and I try to do my research. So hopefully, even if folks don't agree with everything, they will at least, be able to think about something in a new way.
Yeah.
That was what I was really trying to do.
Hey, the Sandlot is a great movie, but it did get left off of our list for much the same reason that
Hmm.
you write about in the book, that it's a different story. It's not just about the what's going on. And I'll also tell you, you said this is not a definitive book, but when we watched Moneyball, I was saying, well, actually, Art Howe was pretty supportive of this. And
Nice.
hey, that the scout, that was a real scout. And
Yeah.
they didn't talk about like this happens over years, and they didn't
Mhm.
talk about all these great players that they have. So I was taking things from the book to share as trivia
Oh,
points.
that
So
makes me very happy. I'm glad to hear that.
so, all right, these rapid questions, we have a few minutes left. You can explain if you want. You don't have to give any explanation at all if you want.
Okay.
Um, First one, do you have a favorite baseball movie or top two or three?
A League of Their Own, Bull Durham, Bad News Bears, one, two,
Okay.
three, in some order.
Okay. Um, what was this kind of goes along with the favorite maybe, but what was the baseball movie of your childhood?
I think, there were these movies in the late 80s that like you, like I don't think I was allowed to see them right away, but I'm so excited about seeing them that they were in my imagination even before I saw them. So it was
Yeah.
probably Major League and Bull Durham. Like those were the
Okay.
ones when I saw the previews or the trailers for them, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to see this movie. And I was raised by a single mom. My mom was just like, no, you're 8 years old, you're not watching that movie. But I probably found a way. I don't remember when I first saw them, but they were huge, like exciting, exciting things that happened.
And one of the highlights of I used to go to an annual conference in Chapel Hill, and one year I was able to make it to Durham when the Bulls were playing, and obviously they're playing in their new stadium. I didn't get to see the historic stadium. I regretted when I later learned that the historic stadium was like a mile or 2 miles from the
Yeah.
new one. I didn't visit it, but um,
They
so
do
do you?
still have the hit the bull, win a stake
Yeah,
thing. They did bring that over to the new stadium,
yeah.
right?
Do you have a favorite baseball quote?
Oh God, not from a baseball movie, just like a quote about baseball, you mean?
It could be from a movie. It doesn't have to be from a movie.
Well, I've been signing books all summer, and I try to ask people what their favorite baseball movie is, and I try to put a quote from that movie. Um, and if someone seems really cool and they say their favorite movie is A League of Their Own, I always write "Avoid the clap, Jimmy Dugan." So I guess it would be that one.
I my favorite movie is Bull Durham, but there's not a lot of things you should quote from that movie, probably.
Yeah.
Um, so actually, I really enjoy from Moneyball how it's hard not to be romantic about baseball.
That's
That's
my
a
go-to. That's
that's
my
a really great
go-to.
one.
If I don't know what someone's favorite movie is, that's the one I write in the
Okay.
inscription because I totally agree.
Did you have a this is to did you have a favorite movie to write about? And was there one movie you did not get to include that you wanted to?
Yeah. So I would say the two I was most excited to write about were Little Big League and Sugar, because those were movies that I really wanted to shine a spotlight on, that I felt needed them. It was great fun to write about Bull Durham and A League of Their Own, but everybody knows and loves those movies already. So that's one type of writing when you're letting people indulge in their likes. But Sugar is a movie, it's an independent film that didn't get a lot of attention when it was made and sort of has developed a cult following, but I think a lot of people still don't know about. And Little Big League is a movie I think a lot of people had forgotten about. So it was really, I felt very full of purpose when I was writing those chapters. As far as movies I didn't get to write about, but I wanted to do, I really like Fever Pitch a lot. As a fan of a perpetually losing franchise, like I really relate to that film, and I think it has some really insightful things to say about fandom. It didn't quite fit my narrative of like how like this movie tells us something about America. I had a draft where I tried to shoehorn it in a little bit into one of the chapters, but I mostly took it out. I think there's one paragraph on it in the book as it currently stands. The other movie I like a lot that again didn't quite fit the narrative is Mr. 3000. Like I think that's a
Yeah.
really fun film. I like how they get around the problem of making sure these guys look like Major League Baseball players by focusing it on a character who's been retired for years and is not in
Mhm.
plain shape. I thought that was really clever. And I found the climax of that movie actually really moving. I think it has good values, that film. I appreciate it. And values that are intrinsic to baseball as well, about sacrifice and teamwork. And I thought it was really well done. But again, I couldn't squeeze it into the overall.
Okay, two more. One, um, after writing this book, if you did it again, what would you do differently, if anything?
I'll give you an honest answer. I would have taken up the offer of my friend to do a line edit of the book, because when you publish a book and it is done and you're looking at it, all you can see are the mistakes.
Yeah.
And there are mistakes in this book. There are typos here and there. There are factual errors. Now, authors aren't supposed to talk about this because we don't want people looking for them and we don't want people pointing them out to us. But they're there. And it's one of the hardest things in finalizing a book is just seeing what is on the page,
Yeah.
because you're in your head the whole time and you're thinking about the overall scope of it. But really seeing what's there, it takes like 4 or 5 revisions to see it all. And I had a friend who's like, "Hey, I'll do a line edit. I'll look over every line of it." And I was like, "No, no, my publishers will do that. You don't have to do it." And they did, but even they missed some stuff. And just the more eyes you can have on it, really, the better. And next time I write a book, I will have all of my friends do all of the line edits, because as much as proud as I am of the book, and I am proud of it, some of those mistakes they haunt me still.
And the last one going off of that, what's next? Is there a story, a book, or a project you want to tell? What's the next thing you're wanting to work on?
I do have another baseball book that I'm thinking about doing next. I have 3 ideas that I'm currently pursuing, and only one of them is a sports book. Um, I can't talk too much about it, but I will say it revolves around the idea of tribalism in sports and in society. It's something I've tried to purge of myself as a baseball fan.
Hmm.
I have had moments where I've taken losses by my team way too hard, and it's impacted my life in dramatic ways. And I've tried to purge myself of that. I've tried to get to a place where I can be happy when my team wins and not feel like the world is ending when they lose. And it's been a lot of work. And I want to write a book about that and how hating other teams because, they wear different uniforms than your guys, like that's bad. And that's wrong.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
that's wrong in society and it's wrong in sports too. And so I have a book project that is about that a little bit. There are a couple baseball novels that I would like to write one day. I love reading baseball novels, and I have a couple of ideas that are interested in there, but that's probably years away for
Okay.
me. So we'll have to wait and see. But I do have a couple of ideas that are not about baseball either. As much as I love it, I don't really want to get pigeonholed as a baseball writer. I have
Yeah.
other things I want to write about too. So the next book might be in a different.
Well, I mean, my research is actually on group behavior, rivalry, all
Hmm.
that tribalism.
Ah.
So we can I'm really looking forward to that and we can have conversations in
I'll
the
tell you
future
the
about that.
idea off camera sometime for sure.
Um so thank you for doing this. What is the best way for people to get hold of you, to find the book, be able to follow what you're doing?
So go to my website, noahgittell.com, two T's, two L's. I do have a couple more events coming up. Most of them are done by now, but I don't know when this is going up exactly, but I'm going to be in Raleigh, North Carolina at the Rialto movie theater. They're screening Eight Men Out, and I'm going to give a little talk on September 8th. And then in Connecticut, where I live, I'm going to be at Yale. They do free screenings every Thursday. We're going to do Moneyball. I'm going to do a conversation between me and Bilga Abiri, who's the film critic for Vulture, one of the best film critics in the country, as far as I'm concerned. We're going to talk about Moneyball after that. And it's a free screening as well. So if anybody watching this is in Connecticut or anywhere near there, definitely come out to that.
Okay. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Noah, for doing this. This was a really cool conversation. I love the book. I've listened to it. It's one I'm going to listen to multiple times. And get some and I know I'll get something new from it every time I listen. So thank you so much for doing this. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Cody.
Bye.